I was watching a video this morning by Contrapoints on free speech, and there's a certain irony in the fact that this video has been flagged down from YouTube. I think he's put it up on another site, VidMe, I think, and it's probably been mirrored elsewhere on YouTube by now. But it's a very interesting video, and the content is really good, but also obviously the irony of it being flagged and therefore it being in the realm of a kind of free speech issue is interesting. So I want to just talk about that. In terms of the content, what Contrapoints does in this video is he talks about it. He starts off by identifying 3 areas in which limitations to free speech might be seen to operate. One of which he calls the top end, is a kind of legislative, legal frameworks, things like the First Amendment in the United States or hate speech laws, that kind of thing, which are the structural elements of the state which place greater or lesser limitations on what we are allowed to say and do. At the bottom level, he says, there's this more social sanctions against free speech, the kinds of actions that we might take to try to stop people around us saying things that we don't like, or the things that people might do to us to stop us saying things that they don't like, and the kinds of things we might do to ourselves. You know, we all censor ourselves on certain occasions, don't we? We don't swear in front of our mums, that kind of thing. So this is the limitations on free speech which operate at a social level, and again, good, ill, all that kind of stuff is in operation. But between this, Contrapoint says, there's also a level in which is kind of organisational or institutional, and in this he cites 2 examples. He says university campuses, which have, of course, they operate within the law, and of course there is also social things happening, but there's also a kind of set of institutional codes, guidelines, codes of practice, in which people have to adhere to. And things like deplatforming is an example of an action which might be seen as limiting free speech or protecting some forms of speech and not protecting others because of certain institutional requirements. And he also cites workplaces. Most workplaces have rules in which prevent people using racial slurs, for example, and there's good reasons for that. But it is, in a technical sense, a limitation on free speech. So again, that's another example. But of course, in addition to things like workplaces and universities, platforms, social media platforms, are also organisations, institutions, if you like, which have their own additional sets of guidelines, terms of service, codes of practice, which protect certain forms of speech, don't protect others, which provide tools to limit free speech, and which offer those constraints. And YouTube is one example of that. And again, ironically, Contrapoints himself has been subject to that constraint, with this very video being flagged as a result of that. I think that's interesting. It's, from YouTube's perspective, it clearly works well enough. Their systems of by which certain videos are flagged well enough, because they haven't substantially changed the flagging system in their 10 years of operation, over 10 years of operation. Despite many people complaining about it, many examples of false flagging, as it's called, as sometimes called, this kind of action. So clearly, it's working well enough from YouTube's perspective to allow them to persist as a successful business, reasonably successful business. It's an aspect of platform capitalism, probably, which I think is Nick Cernak's term. Anywho, that's a slightly different subject. But the way that this limitation operates on YouTube and other sites as well, but YouTube particularly, is really interesting, I think. Because for me, the way it operates is kind of paradoxical and a little bit incoherent. Because if I can just outline what I think are 2 very simple ways in which restrictions on free speech operate, I'll just indicate 2, and then I'll suggest that YouTube tries to hybridize these 2 methods in a really weird way. One way in which speech is limited is by reference to a set of overall rules and guidelines. The First Amendment to the Constitution is a is a guideline which places fairly rigorously identifiable limits on what constitutes free speech. Hate speech laws, blasphemy even, some countries still have blasphemy laws, place certain limitations on what can be said, and they're relatively straightforward for the most part, and they apply to everyone, and it's everybody sings according to that same hymn book, if you like. That's one way of doing it, and under that system, it's any particular example of speech is simply compared to the guidelines, compared to the laws that exist, that piece of legislation, and if it falls outside the terms of that legislation, then it's in contravention and it's removed. The other way of doing it that operates more at a kind of social level is a kind of localization process. The example I gave earlier where I don't swear in front of my mum, and many people don't, that's a limitation that I place on my capacity to speak in certain circumstances, or at least I did when my mum was alive. But clearly I don't do that in other circumstances. There are many situations in which I feel it's completely appropriate and desirable to swear, and I thoroughly enjoy myself in that situation. And the same is true from other kinds of forms of speech. The kinds of things we think is appropriate to say in some situations is going to be different from what we consider to say in others. And that can vary, of course, from person to person, from group to group, from community to community. And lots of different, wildly different community standards can coexist, and people can move through them relatively straightforwardly. And social sanctions are only brought to bear when you take the codes from one environment into another. And then you're quickly brought to book, and you can make a decision about how you want to proceed. But that's a much more kind of diverse and dispersed set of guidelines, if you like, to free speech. YouTube tries to do both. They have a set of rules and guidelines. They have the community guidelines. They have the terms of service, and anybody can look at those. So in a sense, we're all operating according to those rules. But of course, YouTube doesn't apply those rules unless a video is flagged, unless it's reported. YouTube doesn't check videos themselves unless they are reported. They're not allowed to report it. They have safe harbor status, as it's called. They're not allowed to pre-screen videos. They can only react. They can't be proactive. So even though it's got a set of guidelines, which all videos are supposed to adhere to, many videos are in contravention of those, wildly in contravention of those, and they stay on YouTube's site because no one's reported them. However, as soon as someone does report a video, the various processes come into play, and they're complex and mostly automated these days, and videos are taken down as a result of that. So that reporting process is outsourced, it's diverse, it's highly specific, it's kind of handed over to the community. People applying different standards, groups applying different standards. It's that kind of social model for setting the terms of what's considered acceptable speech. But at the same time, they're operating a set of guidelines. And it's when those two things come into coincidence is, I think, when problems happen. And then it happens all the time. Because in that automated system, of course, as we know, when videos are flagged, and they usually have to be flagged a number of times, and various algorithms are brought into play to give various weights to how these flags take place. Those flags are, at a certain point after appeal, they are kind of reviewed by humans, in that a human has got 15 seconds to look at a screen with sample frames from the video and some metadata, and then they've got about 15 seconds to hit the button to take it down or not, and most of the videos that get to that stage are indeed taken down. So it's a weird hybrid system which doesn't really serve anybody very good apart from YouTube itself. I mean, obviously YouTube is a bit of a cleft stick. They can't just leave everything up. But at the same time, they they can't review themselves, so they have to be reactive. But they're reactive to, if the system they don't have the tools to allow small local community practices, community guidelines to actually develop. It's so easy to have videos just taken down just by a group of people just deciding, as I think happened in Contrapoints' case, they don't like this particular guy, so they mass flag the video down. And somebody on minimum wage working for Google somewhere in South America gets 15 seconds to see an image of Contrapoints and some swear words, and they say, yep, that's gone. 15 seconds, it's out of there. It's a crappy system, and I do wish someone would invent a smarter one.